Captain Maya Chen stared at the curved ceiling of her cell, counting the irregular pulsations of the bioluminescent fungi that provided the only light in this damp corner of the hegemony prison complex. 37 days since her scientific expedition ship had been seized in disputed space. 37 days as the only survivor of her crew, subjected to tests, observations, and the cold, clinical curiosity of her Vrexian captors. They called humans soft ones in their clicking, whistling language, a designation that was both accurate and deeply dismissive. To the multi-limbed, chitinous Vrexians who dominated this arm of the galaxy, humans were nothing but fragile curiosities from a backwater world. An insignificant species that had somehow managed rudimentary space travel, despite their obvious biological inferiorities. No exoskeleton, no natural weapons, pitiful sensory capabilities, emotionally unstable, physically weak. Maya had overheard the research scientists discussing her species like one might describe an amusing but ultimately unimpressive specimen. Her translator implant picked up every demeaning assessment, every dismissive click. The cell door dissolved with a hiss, revealing the towering form of Subcommander Kale Rixix, his polished carapace glinting under the dim light. Soft one, he addressed her, mandibles twitching in what Maya had come to recognize as amusement. Your evaluation period has concluded. Maya rose to her feet, pulling herself to her full height, which still left her staring at the middle set of the Vrexian's 4 arms. And? She asked, voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. The exalted science director finds you unsuitable for continued research. However, the Spectacle Division has expressed interest. You are to be transferred to the Grand Arena. Maya's blood ran cold. During her imprisonment, she'd heard whispers about the arena, a massive coliseum where the hegemony's conquered species were forced to fight for survival against apex predators from across the galaxy. It was entertainment for the Vrexian elite, a demonstration of their superiority as they watched lesser beings struggle and die. When? She asked simply. Now. 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 The transport ship thrummed with energy as it approached the orbital arena, a massive ring structure that glittered like a deadly crown above the Vrexian homeworld. Maya sat in restraints, surrounded by a dozen armed guards and excessive precaution that might have been flattering if it weren't so terrifying. Beside her sat 3 other prisoners, a hulking Baraki warrior with stone-like skin, a serpentine Slytherin whose scales shifted colors with its breathing, and a 4-armed Quetzal whose translucent skin revealed the beating of its 3 hearts. All were formidable species, far more physically imposing than Maya. Yet they looked as terrified as she felt. Human, the Baraki rumbled in the trade language, I have heard your kind possesses secret weapons. Is this true? Maya nearly laughed. If humans possessed secret weapons, they wouldn't be considered a minor species barely worth the hegemony's notice. No, she replied honestly. No natural weapons at all. The Baraki's rocky features shifted into what might have been pity. Then you will die quickly. Perhaps that is mercy. The ship docked with a metallic groan, and the prisoners were marched through sterile corridors into a vast preparation chamber. Here, species were separated into individual holding cells to await their turn in the arena. A Vrexian technician approached Maya's cell, sliding a tray through the energy barrier. Combat attire, he explained dispassionately. Though it will make little difference. On the tray sat what appeared to be standard-issue hegemony military fatigues, minus any protective plating. There was also a simple knife barely more than a sharpened piece of metal with a wrapped handle. What am I fighting? Maya asked, picking up the knife that felt pathetically inadequate. The technician's compound eyes glittered. Krodatsi beast, newly captured from the Death World Nyx, a most impressive specimen. He tilted his head. It has eaten 12 combatants without sustaining injury. He left without further explanation, the energy barrier resealing behind him. Maya sat on the cold floor, knife in hand, and tried to think through her limited options. She was a xenobiologist, not a soldier. Her expertise lay in understanding alien life, not killing it. In a cruel twist of fate, she would now face an alien predator not as a scientist, but as prey. But understanding alien life was exactly what she needed now. "Krataxi," she whispered, searching her memory for any information on the species. Her expedition had been cataloging life forms on the outer rim before their capture. Had she heard of these creatures? A fragment of memory surfaced a research paper she'd read at the academy. Krataxi were ambush predators from a high-gravity world, six-limbed with powerful muscles and natural camouflage. They hunted by scent and heat signatures rather than sight, which was poorly developed. Their hides were nearly impenetrable, but they had a weakness. Something about their nervous system. The energy barrier dissolved, interrupting her thoughts. Four guards entered with restraints. "It is time, soft one," the lead guard announced. "The spectacle begins." The roar of the crowd hit Maya like a physical force as she was marched into the vast arena. Tens of thousands of Vrexians filled the tiered seating that spiraled upward into the artificial atmosphere of the orbital station. Floating cameras hovered everywhere, broadcasting the spectacle across the hegemony's 1,000 worlds. The arena floor itself was massive, at least a kilometer across, and had been transformed into a facsimile of a jungle environment. Dense vegetation, artificial rock formations, and a small stream cutting through the center provided ample hiding places for both predator and prey. Maya was led to a starting platform at the edge of the jungle. The restraints were removed, and she was left with nothing but the clothes on her back and the pitiful knife in her hand. A voice boomed across the arena, speaking in the formal Vrexian language that her implant translated with a slight delay. "Esteemed members of the hegemony, today we present a unique spectacle. Observe the human curiosity from the outer worlds. Soft, weak, with no natural defenses. How long will this specimen survive against the mighty Krataxi beast of Nyx?" The crowd chittered and clicked in anticipation. On the opposite side of the arena, a massive cage was being lowered from the ceiling. "The odds have been set at 30 seconds. Place your wagers now." Maya gripped her knife tighter, forcing her breathing to slow. 30 seconds. They thought she would last half a minute. The distant cage door slid open, and a ripple of movement in the artificial foliage was the only indication that the predator had been released. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1, begin. A horn blared, and Maya immediately dove into the dense undergrowth, moving as quietly as possible. Her first instinct was to run, but that would be suicide. The Krataxi would track her by heat and scent. Running would only generate more heat and scatter her scent more widely. Instead, she needed to use her environment. Think like a scientist, not like prey. The Krataxi hunted by scent and heat. The stream could mask both. Moving in a low crouch, Maya made her way toward the sound of running water, careful to disturb as little vegetation as possible. The knife she kept ready, though she knew it would do little against the creature's hide. In the nervous system. What was it about the Krataxi's nervous system? A sudden silence fell over the nearby jungle. Sounds the artificial insects and birds programmed into the environment had stopped their calls. Something was approaching. Maya froze, straining her ears. A soft rustling came from her left, then stopped. The predator was stalking her, moving with surprising stealth for what must be a massive creature. Slowly, she reached down and grabbed a handful of the damp soil beneath her. In a swift motion, she hurled it far to her right, where it landed with a soft thud. The reaction was immediate, a blur of motion, as something huge crashed through the underbrush toward the sound. Maya caught only a glimpse of segmented limbs and mottled hide before she was moving, sprinting toward the stream she could now see glittering through the trees. Behind her, the Krataxi realized the deception and changed direction, pursuing with terrifying speed. Maya reached the water and plunged in without hesitation. The stream was deeper than it appeared, coming up to her waist. The cold shocked her system, but she pushed forward, moving downstream as fast as the current would allow. From the forest edge, a massive form emerged. The Krataxi stood nearly 3 meters tall, its 6 powerful limbs ending in wicked claws. Its body was serpentine but heavily muscled, covered in overlapping plates that shifted color to match its surroundings. A wedge-shaped head housed multiple sensory pits, quivering as they sought her scent and heat signature. The creature paused at the water's edge, its head sweeping back and forth in confusion as the current carried Maya's scent downstream and the water masked her heat. Maya used the moment of hesitation to put more distance between them, moving deeper into the water until only her head remained above the surface. The crowd's distant roar changed tenor surprise, replacing bloodlust as the soft, weak human continued to evade the apex predator. Remarkable. The human uses the water to confuse the cryotaxi's senses. A clever tactic. But how long can it last? The announcer's voice carried across the arena, and Maya silently cursed. The cryotaxi might not understand the words, but the sound itself would draw its attention. Sure enough, the creature's head snapped toward the stream, and it began to pace along the bank, following her progress through the water. It was only a matter of time before it would plunge in after her or cut her off downstream. Maya needed a plan. She needed to remember what she knew about cryotaxi anatomy. As she floated with the current, she searched her surroundings for anything useful. The artificial environment was detailed rocks, plants, even small fish in the stream, but nothing that could serve as a weapon against such a formidable predator. In the nervous system, something about thermal regulation. The memory clicked into place. Cryotaxi had evolved on a world with extreme temperature fluctuations. To survive, they developed specialized thermal regulation organs, nodules along their spine that vented excess heat during exertion. These nodules connected directly to their central nervous system and were the creature's only vulnerable point. Maya now had knowledge, but how to use it? The stream curved ahead, and beyond it, the jungle gave way to a rocky outcropping. If she could reach those rocks, get to higher ground. The cryotaxi suddenly disappeared from the riverbank, and Maya's heart raced. It was flanking her, perhaps cutting through the jungle to intercept her downstream. She had to move now. Taking a deep breath, Maya lunged out of the water toward the rocky outcropping. Her soaked clothes weighed her down, but adrenaline propelled her forward. Behind her, the undergrowth exploded as the cryotaxi burst from the jungle, having circled around just as she feared. The crowd roared as predator and prey raced toward the rocks. Maya could feel the creature's footfalls shaking the ground behind her, getting closer with each stride. 10 meters to the rocks. 8, 6. The cryotaxi lunged, one massive claw swiping at her back. Maya dove forward, rolling under a low overhang between two boulders, a space too narrow for the massive predator to follow. The creature howled in frustration, its claws scrabbling at the opening, tearing chunks from the stone in its frenzy to reach her. Maya pressed herself against the back of the small cave, gasping for breath. The knife still clutched in her hand seemed even more useless now that she'd seen the creature up close. Incredible. The human survives the initial encounter. But it has trapped itself. How will it escape? The announcer was right. She was trapped. The cryotaxi was too strong to outrun, too well armored to injure, and now it knew exactly where she was. It would only be a matter of time before it found a way to reach her or until she was forced to emerge from hunger or thirst. But Maya had no intention of waiting. Humans hadn't survived on Earth and expanded to the stars by hiding in caves. She studied her surroundings more carefully. The small cave was formed by several large boulders leaning against each other. At the top, a small opening let in light too small for her to fit through, but enough to see that more rocks lay above. An idea formed. A desperate, possibly suicidal idea, but an idea nonetheless. The cryotaxi continued to claw at the entrance, its frustration growing. Each impact sent small showers of stone dust raining from the ceiling of the cave. Maya began to climb the rough inner wall of her shelter, working her way toward the small opening at the top. The rocks were slippery from the moisture of her clothes, but she found handholds and pulled herself up. Through the opening, she could see that the rocky outcropping continued upward, forming a small cliff face perhaps 10 meters high. More importantly, several large boulders balanced precariously near the edge, directly above where the Krataxi now clawed at her hiding place. The creature's thermal regulation nodules would be along its spine, visible as small protrusions when it overheated from exertion. Like now. Maya took the knife and wedged it into a crack in the rocks, testing if it would hold her weight. It shifted but didn't give way. Taking a deep breath, she began to haul herself through the small opening, scraping her shoulders and back on the rough stone. The crowd's roar changed again as they spotted her emerging from the top of the rocky shelter. The Krataxi, sensing the shift in attention, looked up just as Maya pulled herself completely free. Their eyes met the creature's alien sensory pits locking onto her human gaze, and in that moment, Maya felt something she didn't expect, not just fear, but recognition. Two intelligent predators acknowledging each other. The Krataxi abandoned its attempt to dig into the cave and began to scale the rock face with surprising agility, its 6 limbs finding purchase where Maya's 2 had struggled. Maya scrambled to her feet and dashed toward the precariously balanced boulders. The creature was fast, too fast. She would never make it to the boulders in time. So she did the unexpected. She turned and ran directly toward the edge of the cliff, toward the approaching Krataxi. The creature hesitated for a fraction of a second, confused by prey running toward it rather than away. That hesitation was all Maya needed. At the last possible moment, she veered to the side, skirting the edge of the cliff. The Krataxi, its momentum too great to change direction quickly, scrambled to follow. Its massive weight hit the edge of the cliff, exactly where Maya had hoped beneath the balanced boulders. The rock face crumbled under the impact, sending both the Krataxi and the boulders tumbling down in a thunderous landslide. Maya threw herself flat against the ground, clinging to a solid outcropping as the earth shook beneath her. When the dust settled, she peered over the edge. The Krataxi lay half buried in rubble, still alive but momentarily stunned by the fall. More importantly, the impact had caused it to overheat, and the thermal regulation nodules along its spine were now fully extended, glowing a faint orange and pulsing with the creature's rapid heartbeat. Maya didn't hesitate. She half climbed, half slid down the ruined cliff face to where the creature lay. Grabbing a sharp stone dislodged in the landslide, she approached the predator from behind. The Krataxi sensed her approach and struggled to free itself from the rubble, but its lower limbs were pinned. It twisted its serpentine neck, jaws snapping at her, but couldn't reach. Maya raised the stone and brought it down with all her strength onto the nearest glowing nodule. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Krataxi convulsed, a high-pitched wail escaping its jaws. The thermal regulation system was directly connected to the central nervous system. Disrupting it sent the creature into neurological shock. Maya struck again, targeting each exposed nodule methodically. The Krataxi's struggles weakened with each blow until finally it lay still. The silence in the arena was absolute. For nearly a full minute, not a sound could be heard from the tens of thousands of Vrexians watching in stunned disbelief. Then, the announcer's voice, subdued and lacking its earlier bombast. The human has defeated the Krataxi beast. The silence broke, replaced not by cheers but by the agitated clicking and whistling of Vrexians trying to process what they had just witnessed. A soft, weak human, a species considered barely worth noticing, had just outthought and outfought one of the most feared predators in known space. Maya stood beside the fallen Krataxi, breathing heavily, stone still clutched in her bloody hand. She looked up at the nearest camera drone hovering above her and spoke clearly, knowing her words would be translated for the entire hegemony to hear. "My name is Captain Maya Chen of Earth. I am not a warrior. I am a scientist. What you just witnessed wasn't strength defeating strength. It was knowledge defeating ignorance." She paused, making sure to look directly into the camera. "Remember that before you judge any species as inferior." 6 standard months later, Maya stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching as the Vrexian homeworld grew larger in the view screen. Since what the galactic media now called the Arena incident, much had changed. The footage of a human scientist defeating a taxi beast through intelligence rather than strength had spread throughout the hegemony and beyond. Overnight, humanity's status had shifted from curious biological anomaly to potential threat. That fear had quickly transformed into grudging respect when Earth's diplomatic corps seized the opportunity to request formal recognition and non-aggression treaties. "Captain Chen," a voice called from behind her. "The hegemony delegation is ready to receive you." Maya turned to face Admiral Okafor, the imposing head of Earth's newly formed First Contact Division. "Are they still insisting on calling this a cultural exchange rather than formal diplomatic relations?" Maya asked. The Admiral smiled. "Pride dies hard, especially for a species that has dominated this sector for 10,000 years. But make no mistake, they're terrified of what humanity might become if they don't bring us into their sphere of influence peacefully." Maya nodded, smoothing the front of her formal uniform. After her return to Earth, she had been given a choice: return to scientific research with honors or accept a new position as humanity's first official representative to the Vrexian hegemony. The decision had been surprisingly easy. "I've reviewed the latest intelligence," the Admiral continued. "The Vrexians have been frantically studying human history since your escape. They seem particularly fixated on how a species with our physical limitations managed to survive on a world filled with predators, much less develop space travel. What did they find most surprising?" Maya asked, genuinely curious about how aliens perceived human history. "That we were predators ourselves," Admiral Okafor replied. "They couldn't reconcile our physical form with our evolutionary history as persistence hunters. The concept that we chased prey until it collapsed from exhaustion seemed impossible to them." Maya smiled, remembering her own endurance as she had evaded the taxi in the arena. Humans have always been underestimated. As they approached the docking bay of the massive Vrexian diplomatic station, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the viewscreen. She no longer saw herself as the terrified prisoner in a cell, counting fungal pulses to maintain sanity. Now she stood tall, the first human to formally represent Earth to a galactic power that had once considered her species barely worth noticing. Among the waiting Vrexian delegation on the docking platform, Maya recognized a familiar figure, Subcommander Kale Rixix, now bearing the insignia of a full commander. The same officer who had sent her to die in the arena would now treat with her as an equal. As the airlock cycled and the doors prepared to open, Admiral Okafor gave Maya a questioning look. "Ready, Captain?" Maya Chen, scientist, survivor, and now diplomat, straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Humanity has always been ready," she replied. "The rest of the galaxy just didn't know it yet." The doors slid open, and humanity took its first official step onto the galactic stage.